Welcome to Pique Your Interest, your go-to podcast for all things mortgage and real estate. Hosted by Tanner Greenwald and Tim Milauskas. We bring you expert insights to help you buy, sell, and invest with confidence. Let's dive in.
Hi, welcome back to Pique Your Interest. I'm your host, Tim, and today we're going to talk about the blended rate. The blended rate is something that I've been talking about a lot lately with clients, and it's basically the simple math of, do you keep your interest rate and do a second mortgage? Do you do a cash out refinance? It's all about figuring out what makes the most financial sense. So, here's the scenario that I see play out a lot. Picture this. You've got a 3% interest rate and you have sworn an absolute blood oath that you are never going to touch that mortgage. You're never going to do anything with it. You'll never refinance it. But life happens and you need to access money. You need to get, $100,000 in equity out of your house for, paying off high interest credit card debt or, paying for student loans or college or maybe buy an investment property, something like that. So you need to access the equity that's in your house. Well, how do you do that? Historically, in a falling interest rate environment, people have done a cash out refinance, and that makes a lot of sense because you get a lower rate and you access the money that you're looking for. In today's environment where we've seen interest rates steadily creep up over the last 4 years, holding on to that, 2 or 3 or 4% interest rate is paramount. It's what people want to do. And, if you need to do something like access the equity in your home, a second mortgage has become the way to do it. So, if you're a homeowner, listen closely, help you figure out, what you should be doing. If you're a real estate agent, share this with all the people that you can and help educate the folks. So I would say this. So here's a scenario that will play out. So grab a pen and paper and let's get ready to get started. 4 steps to figuring out what your blended rate is. Okay. First step is you're going to figure out what the current principal balance is on your mortgage, not what you owed in the beginning of your mortgage, but what you owe now. So take whatever you owe. Let's say it's $300,000. And you have an interest rate of 3%. You want to calculate the interest that you're paying yearly on, that mortgage. So, 300,000 times 3% is $9,000. So you're paying $9,000 a year in interest on that loan. Step 2, take a look at a second mortgage. Let's say you need to access $100,000 and the interest rate is 8% on that. That's 8% times $100,000 is $8,000. Step 3, add those two numbers together. 8,000 plus 9,000 is 17,000. Step 4, take that number that you just added together, the 17,000, and divide by the total amount of money that you owe on the mortgage. So 300,000 plus 100,000 is 400,000. Okay, so your math problem is 17,000 divided by 400,000. That equals 4.25%. Why is that 4.25% number important? Well, it's important because you have a 3% interest rate right now, and you really, really, really don't want to get rid of it. The blended rate on the refinance that we just talked about on doing the second mortgage is 4.25%. So as long as interest rates are, above that number. So for instance, now we're in the mid-ish 6s as we sit here in the middle of June 2026. If you're going to get an interest rate of a cash out refinance at 6.5%, it makes absolutely no sense to refinance that entire mortgage into just one at 6.5%, especially since the blended rate is 4.25. So in a scenario like this, you would hold on to that mortgage. If interest rates were lower or, rates on second mortgages were higher, there may come a point where, if interest rates were 4%, it would make sense for you to refinance that 3% interest rate you have into a 4% loan because you're saving an interest over the life of the loan. That's essentially how we determine what the right thing to do is. And the reason I'm bringing this to you today is I've actually had 2 conversations in the last 2 weeks with clients about the blended rate. It sometimes makes sense to refinance the bulk of the mortgage. In other cases, it doesn't. But that's why people like me and my team exist here. To help guide you through these scenarios, make sure it makes sense, kind of give you the numbers. Because, you would look at, a 3% interest rate and your gut would say, well, no, I shouldn't refinance that. I shouldn't touch that. I shouldn't do anything with it. But we don't always make financial decisions based on what our gut tells us. We should make it off of sound financial, mathematical calculations. And so people like me exist so that we can run those numbers for you and say, hey, by the way, you're right. You really should keep that 3%. Or, if rates fall or rates on second mortgages fall and your blended rate falls below where you are, it does make sense to refinance the entire thing. And here's why. So, put people like me to work. Let's run those numbers. Let's make sure it makes sense. Because again, like I said earlier, life happens and you need to access that equity sometimes. So let's do it the right way. Let's do it the smart way. Not based on what we're thinking, but what we can actually show mathematically that works. So that's the blended rate. Hope you learned something today, and I'll see you the next time. Bye.